Well, welcome everybody. Hopefully we can kick it off and take rid of your after dinner or after lunch dip. This morning we had a really good session during the keynote with Brad and Alan around ransomware. And we were actually talking before, prepping for this session. I was like, Brad, you're not going to steal all my thunder or vice versa. So hopefully there's stuff that's new, and otherwise there's stuff that you can recognize. But we're going to talk about ransomware as a service in specifically. And I will start off with a statement. And we will see if this is a question or a statement or if it holds true. Ransomware as a service, as we knew it, was it already doomed to fail before it even started? And it might boggle your mind right now. You might think okay, what are you talking about? But let's go through some examples and see if that holds true. So what I aim to do today is walk through an agenda and see okay, what was the early ransomware as a service, how it started, some examples, some successes, how it kind of shifted from a spray and pray, as we call it, so attacking a lot of consumers, towards attacking organizations as we know it. And then with any empire, like the Roman Empire, there will be cracks in the armor and things will begin to change. So there's some power balance shifts. We see more data exfilled and other things. We'll look at that, and then we'll end up with the conclusions and what's next. So if we look at the early ransomware as a service, as we knew it, it was a spray and pray model. So this is just a slide to very generally explain the concept. We have ransomware admins and developers. They build a strain, they find something successful, and they have people who are interested. We call them affiliates. And these affiliates, they can join this group by doing a job interview. So what you often see, and we'll see examples in this talk as well, of forum postings where they're asking for people to join the network, and they're asking for certain characteristics, that they have certain qualities. And these qualities have changed over time as well. Well, these affiliates, they will have a mechanism to spread their ransomware. So in the earlier days of ransomware as a service, it was more about the masses. It was consumer-based, so this is the early days of where you had no more ransom. They would spray, or they would send it out through spam, or they were botnet controllers, or they used exploit kits just to infect as many endpoints as they could. And those were the metrics that they were judged upon. How many installs can you make at consumer victims? So this is just outside of the realm of the organizations that we see now. So no hospitals, no banks, no government entities, just your end victims. But the model is pretty simple, pretty straightforward, holds true. The victims pay a ransom. The ransom goes towards the admins. They have some kind of payout or cash out mechanism, and then a part will go to the affiliates. So some early examples that we know when we started, and obviously this is not an exercise where I want to list everything that we know, but there are some versions that have a very interesting change. So in 2013, we had CryptoLocker. CryptoLocker was a very interesting one. It was built by the whole Bogachev crew, the guys who were behind Zeus, and CryptoLocker was one of the first ones that were encrypting users' files and demanding something for the encryption keys. And then we had CryptoWall, also very known. One of the first ones. They had more advanced encryption, an interesting communication platform, and they were adopting cryptocurrency using Bitcoin. And Bitcoin is a huge, we touched upon it, I think, in the keynote this morning a little bit, but if it wasn't for Bitcoin, I strongly believe that ransomware wouldn't have grown to the size it is now. Later on, we have a very interesting version that we have some more details on called CTB Locker. We'll dive into that one, and Cerber. These are some examples. Obviously, there's many other variants, and they had Locky and many more, but we'll just stop on these because then you get the notion, you understand how the business model works. So this is CryptoLocker, lock screen. We have CryptoWall right here. And it's interesting if you have, it's not an eye chart, but if you can read it, sometimes they state the amount of Bitcoin. And that's just a chuckle for me, because sometimes they charge 10 Bitcoin or something for a ransom. And it's like, yeah, that's actually a pretty hefty price nowadays. If they only hold on to their Bitcoins, they would have never had to work, but I agreed. This is a very interesting one, CTB Locker, a known one as well. and we have Cerber. So if we look at CTB Locker as an example, this was the original advertisement from the person who developed CTB Locker. His nickname is Tepkin, and this is from the Sloy forum, if I'm not mistaken. And without reading through everything, what's interesting, what kind of sets the scene is this line here. You set the price for your traffic. The way he advertised this model is very much directed towards cyber criminals that have the power of a botnet, that have an ability to install a lot of files on user systems. Not necessarily, as we know it now, towards affiliates that know how to, well, pen test or break into a whole organization, completely own the organization, then install. It's very much a volume game. And what was interesting is that in the past, we've done an investigation on CTB Locker, and we followed a couple of affiliates, and these affiliates, they had a IRC botnet in which they infected their victims, but interesting enough, they also chatted the communication between each other via the IRC botnet, which you should not do, but it was in Romanian. And here are some snippets of the communication that we had. And this is between two individuals. They've both been arrested, by the way, because we have a video later on. These are two Romanian individuals, and they're basically, as you can read it, saying like, hey, we're missing out. This guy is doing something called CTB Locker, and he's making a lot of money with it. And it's like, yeah, one affiliate made 300 Bitcoin. Still, another chuckle. If you held on to 300 Bitcoin, and yeah, you never have to work. But this is how you can see it in action. These individuals, they were doing mostly spamming and just low-level stuff. And they found this on Sloy. They reached out. And this is in a conversation between the two of them, the two co-conspirators, the two affiliates, saying, maybe we need to get in on the game. And this is how it goes. This was the early days. So how did these affiliates infect their victims? Well, this is one example. And this is why I caught the attention. I'm from the Netherlands, and this is the Dutch telco provider, KPN. And they were really good, and this was one of the first ransomware versions that was really good at crafting their fake spamming, or their spams, their phishing emails, and using the natural language to like really, really well-crafted phishing emails. So there were no spelling errors, nothing in there. And the actual person in the autograph and the signature in the bottom was an actual executive at this company. And the CISO of KPN at the time, she got so fed up with this because they got so many complaints. And that's a funny story that this guy lost his internet privileges because nobody, well, he was sending out emails and they were faking that it was Bob Moll's. So they had a whole corporate email saying like, okay, he cannot touch any computer anymore, and any email from Bob Moss or whatever is malicious. So that was one of the consequences. But eventually these individuals, you saw the IRC botnet chat that we lighted out, but there was a lot of other stuff that actually gave a lot of good information away, and it led to the arrest. So here's in 2017 in December. This is a joint party from Europol with the FBI, partly the Secret Service and the Dutch police, going after one of the main suspects. This is a Bitcoin mining farm. So there were real entrepreneurs. All the money that they got from the extortion, they reinvested into a mining rig just to generate more Bitcoin. So yeah, they're inventive. And that these affiliates knew each other, because there was another case that, if you're in the US, you might recall, is Cerber ransomware. Let's see if I can click through. That's this one. And Cerber ransomware at the time were able to encrypt the CCTV cameras of the Washington, D.C. district. And this happened just before the inauguration of Donald Trump. There were two suspects charged with this. One was a girl who actually looks like an influencer, Evelyn Cismaru. And they were working together with the CTB Locker crew. They were actually living in the same house in London at the time when they did all this. They were arrested, she confessed. So this is basically how the old school ransomware worked. It's very interesting. It had a certain structure. It was a bit different from your regular cybercrime that you saw till that time. So we kind of compare the classic RaaS and also the big game hunting. It's almost like the motorcycle gangs, because they have a logo, they have a name, they instill fear. There's a hierarchy. You have somebody who develops the virus, you have somebody who calls the shots, and you have the workers. You have the people that, well, have to infect things and negotiate. So there's a different layer in who gets what. And there's a couple of adjacent surfaces. So you have, and this grows over time. That became very successful when you look at big game hunting, when it became more and more lucrative. So initial access broking, Bitcoin mixing, hosting providers, scripting services, all these things. But it's very similar in structure and organization and the way they put pressure on the people that work within their organization as an organized motorcycle gang, especially those logos, because the logos and the name that will instill fear on your victims. And that worked really well. Funny enough is that if you look, and this is a model from a thesis from Erik van der Zand, and he's kind of describing that the cybercrime network model, in order to commit crime or cybercrime successfully, it's very hard to do everything yourself, because you have to, on one side, in the preparation phase, you have to buy anonymity services. You have to make sure that you can get hosting that is not compromised by the police, that you can communicate with other people without them tracing you. Then, if you want to purchase malware or build malware, you have to test it. You have to make sure it's undetectable. There's all these different phases, and that's more of a network-based model where people work together, where ransomware, and it said it in this view, and mind you, this is a thesis a little bit older, so it was before the heyday, was just one element. Whereas those affiliates working for this network were part of a hierarchy. They were the workers. They were doing the heavy lifting. There wasn't an equal relationship, which is an outlier, because a lot of times when we look at the cyber criminal eco-climate, they're more transactional based. They're like, hey, I'm specialized in this. You want to buy my service? We can work together. I make some money, you make some money. Whereas this had more of a pyramid structure. So that's one thing to note. And if we look at the other shift that we saw with ransomware as a service, going from the consumer problem, where a lot of the banks, a lot of larger organizations were like, well, yeah, it's not really an issue for us, because if we get infected, we just run a new image and we're back in business. Because they were never actually on the system that they infected with ransomware. It was infection install. There was no lateral movement, no escalation of privileges. People were not moving around in your network. And that kind of changed. So looking at the data, we kind of say spray and pray was from 2014 to 2017-ish. And from 2018 onward, it became big game hunting. Much more surgical, much more finding out what your victim is. What can you get from the victim? What's their net worth? And they kind of perfected that to an art. It's interesting to see that one of the first ones to adopt this was Samsam ransomware. If you're not familiar with Samsam, this is their lock screen. And they were one of the first organizations, or criminal organizations, to find the victim, penetrate the network, trying to get control of the network, then hold them for ransom and a much higher ransomware amount. And interesting to say that the FBI had done the whole case, and they indicted 2 Iranians. So was this actually a cyber criminal operation or just a nation-state side gig? Nevertheless, it has changed ransomware indefinitely, forever, because all the other groups took note of what happened. So they were shifting their tactics. So if we go back to that picture I had in the beginning, the only thing you had to swap out, well, in the picture, is the victims. But essentially, in order to obtain access to the hospitals, all the other things, you need to have different affiliates. So it requires a different skill set. So if we look at the original advert from Tepkin that we saw beforehand, where he's very much looking at traffic, and we take the one from ReEvil, and this is one that's later on, there's a different change, because ReEvil is asking for somebody who knows their way in network editor storage, tape backups, knows how to use Metasploit, Cobalt Strike, Kodiak, knows a lot about the Active Directory, and knows a lot about virtualization. It almost sounds like it's a sysadmin that's gone rogue. But you can see that they recruit different people in their network because their targets have changed. So by changing the targets, you need to change your network. And this kind of gave way towards the real heyday. So one of the bigger ones that we think, and obviously you have Conti or whatever, but the ones that were very verbose is, for instance, GangCrab is one example. That group had like a star status within the cybercriminal underground. Their posts had the biggest pictures. They thought they were untouchable. They were always, beating their chest about how successful they were. It's a lot of marketing, and a lot of people wanted to be there. But it's all a tactic. Because if you get that name out and people get infected by you, and you can see that lock screen that says GangCrab, well, then you're scared. They instill fear on their victims. And what was interesting when we looked at all these ransomware, almost the empires, so they shifted to the larger organizations, there's a couple of things that stand out that make them successful. So what are the big game ransomware as a service key success factors that we determined? One of the things that we saw when we studied from all the way from Klopp to ReEvil to Conti is if you really want to scale up your operations and you have, let's say, 100 affiliates, and you want to infect those 100 affiliates, 10 victims each, how are you going to do the negotiations? Are you going to rely on Proton Mail or just on email negotiations? That's going to be very, very tricky going back and forth and managing all those, the inbox, for instance. I even have trouble managing my own inbox. So we see a shift from ransomware versions when they go from email negotiations to a dedicated platform. When we see that in their code or in the way they set up their architecture, that's for us a sign, okay, these are trying to step up. They want to make more victims, they want to grow their network. Klopp is the outlier in this because they've been around, but they still rely on email negotiation, which we'll do a case study on the Move IT breach that we all know. It kind of worked against them, was their Achilles heel, because if you have more than 1,000 victims and you want to negotiate through email with them, it didn't really work out for them. Another factor that's interesting is that they will incorporate a leak site. So in order to do your external marketing, to show that you mean business, a leak site is perfect. You have a place, you pull all your victims go there, but all your security researchers, me included, and everybody else monitors these leak sites, looks at all the new victims, write blogs about it, does statistics on this. It all helps building that ransomware as a service. Stable malware and decryptors. We're going to talk in a little bit about how this, if you don't have this, what will happen. But essentially, if you want to do ransomware and you're in the business of encrypting files, so you can also do data extortion, obviously, but the actual ransomware to encrypt files, you need to make sure that you can decrypt the files, because otherwise you have a wiper. And you can do that once. You can, encrypt something once, get the money, but if they don't get the files back, word will be on the street, word will get out, and your reputation is ruined, because nobody will pay you because they have no guarantee that they're going to get their files back. So it is, like we could see it with, let's say, ReEvil. They had a statement on their leak site from Coveware or from other security researchers or from anyone. They were quoting the blogs that we wrote as a security industry saying like, hey, this ransomware, okay, we looked at it, it's pretty solid, it's well written, and we saw that you can get, it actually decrypts, there's no faults, which I can understand, but they use it for their own marketing, so like, hey, don't take our word for it, you're gonna get your files back. Just look at the security researchers, they claim it's good. But having a stable malware and good decryptors is essential if you want to build that network. A big success factor is the increase of the affiliate spots and a strict selection. So in order for that ransomware as a service model to grow, you want to have more affiliates. But in order to have more affiliates, you still want to have a very strict selection process, because if you let anyone in, well, heck, it could be a security researcher infiltrating, or it could be somebody who's not performing. So if you really want to, it's like a normal organization where you have your sales teams. If your sales team does not reach their quotas, or they're not performing, well, they're taking up a spot for somebody else. So you throw them out and you get something new, somebody new. And that during the heyday for GandCrab, ReEvil, Conti, the ones that were really verbose also on the forums, that's what we saw. They said, hey, we kicked X amount of people out, we have new slots, you can apply. Another nice indicator is that there's outsourcing or partnering with facilitating services. So you will see when ransomware as a service became bigger, they were looking at other cybercrime services to help them offload some of the work. ReEvil used BitMix for their Bitcoin mixing. They had a direct API. So whatever money came in went straight through the tumbler, came out the other end. There's other examples where they use crypto services, where their affiliates could use these crypto services at a discount to know that the virus is undetectable. And you will see this more and more when the ransomware group will grow. There's only so much they can do themselves. And because of the nature of the cybercriminal underground, that it's network-based, they will seek out collaboration, but still internally have the strict hierarchy. And this is a very important one that backfires a lot, is good administration of your infections and your finances. That hierarchy model is, exception for Conti then, was a commission-based model. So I infect a big victim, and I get part of the amount that the victim pays, the extortion amount. But you need to be able to administer or have a good administration and good forensic accounting to make sure that that affiliate, especially if you have 100 affiliates, is actually getting what they need to get. Because if they're infecting, let's say, $1 billion company and they're expecting a payout for, let's say, it's a 75 million ransom and they're getting 80% of that and they're not getting it because there's an error in your accounting, well, you lose faith. Then people will snitch or people will get upset. We'll talk about a little Conti example. That's not commission-based, but they had a salary. And there's no workers' council among cyber criminals. So if they're not happy with their salary, well, what do? They probably put your whole attack manual on the internet, or they talk about your chats and all kinds of things. So these are some key success factors that we did see that you had to establish in order to make it work. But still, there was a hierarchy. So still that network, that pyramid scheme. So they had the strict interviews. There was a vetting. There were performance quotas, and you had exclusivity. So you were not allowed to work with other groups. That was not allowed. They didn't like it. And we had examples where the admins were taking over negotiations. So if it didn't work out to their liking, or it was a really big fish, as you might say, they would take over negotiations. This is one example of the performance quotas. This is the top, the two, if you see, in both the blue and the red one, that's the affiliate. And the from, that is actually one of the admins of ReEvil, and they're using secured.biz Jabber. And it's essentially, we've had a lot of these messages. Hey, when are you standing to start again? And then if you don't start, we'll disable your account. So they're putting clear quotas on their affiliates. Affiliates need to perform, otherwise you're out. So it's not only our sales teams in our respective companies, cyber criminals do the same thing. You need to sell, you need to hit your quota. And this Bitcoin, he was one of the, together with Unknown, who had a different moniker, that was the person putting the heat on the affiliates. They were managing the affiliate relationships, onboarding them, vetting them, but they weren't the people making the malware. They were just managing all the affiliates. So that's how they made millions of dollars. But for how long could this continue? Because as we said, it's a bit different from the regular cyber criminal world. And we saw some cracks in the armor, and I'm sure everybody's seen them as well. One example I want to highlight, and that's combining Gouda cheese, Babuk ransomware, Miko Matvev or Boris Yeltsin, and faulty AXSI lockers. This is an actual picture. In the US, you had Colonial Pipeline with all the pictures. The Netherlands were famous for our cheese, and we had a cheese shortage. All the supermarkets were out of cheese. So what has happened? Babuk ransomware at the time infected a logistics company in the Netherlands, and this happened in April 2021. And they had a proxy logon vulnerability. They came in, This logistics company was running virtual machines. So they launched the Babuk EXI locker, and they encrypted the whole inventory of the logistics company. So they were flat. They couldn't do anything. The logistics company went into negotiations. Eventually, they settled for an amount, and then Babuk gave the decryptor. However, the decryptor was faulty and corrupted all the files that they had. So that, yeah, kindly essentially wiped everything out. Don't worry, we have still cheese in the supermarket, so that's okay. But in the process, this was the individual behind it. If you're familiar with this, I think Mr. Brian Krebs had done an interview, and our friends at Recorded Future had done an interview as well. And we were closely involved with this case, but he had some problems. And what was interesting is if you look at the timeline of Babuk, it kind of becomes clear. They had a Metropolitan Police hack where they stole data, and that got a lot of attention, more than they could chew, more than they can handle. And the faulty EXI locker against the Dutch logistics company really pissed him off, pushed him over the edge. Because based on the interviews he did with the guys from Dimitri Smelaites from the Recorded Future, he said, like, yeah, my reputation was on the line. I got a faulty decryptor, and I looked like a fool. The next time I infect somebody, they're not going to pay up. And this led to a fallout between Matvev and the other developers of Babuk. The Babuk servers, what was interesting, they were under control. So the disclosed data that's on the servers were under the control of Matvev. And he kind of rebranded them to his side project called Groove, which was interesting. So he kind of took matters in his own hands. And based on the interviews that he gave with Recorded Future at the time, who we were actually in contact with, because he disclosed things in that interview, which is actually not in the public interview, but he disclosed details that only the victims and the people involved with incident response knew. He disclosed them to Dimitri. And Dimitri called us, and he's like, is this true? And it's like, yeah, but nobody knows about this. So he's the prime suspect. But he repurposed these servers, and he used it for data extortion. So he went kind of out of the encryption realm, but went to the data theft and extortion scheme. And funny enough, that exclusivity wasn't really a case, because we found stuff on the Groove servers, aka owned by Matvev, all of a sudden published on Black Matter at that time. So we start to see that the affiliates are getting more power, right? They infected the logistics company, they had everything under control, and then the faulty locker kind of messed up their operation. So they're getting more and more skilled. It's no longer the botnet farmer or the endpoint. These affiliates are getting more and more skilled and starting to speak up. Another crack, the disgruntled Conti employee that wasn't happy that he got paid only $1,500 while the whole Conti executive team had several millions. So he leaked their playbook and some of the Cobalt Strike servers, which we happily used in our research. Another one, like 2022 was the year of the chat leaks, as we call it. We had Conti leaks and Yan Luang, I probably butchered the name, but this gave way. It was necessarily, the Conti leaks wasn't started from a disgruntled employee, but it does show that there's cracks in the armors. So these crime organizations, these empires that for long was very zoned off, closed off, people didn't know what was going on, they were being exposed. And to our advantage, right? We learned a lot from all these chats. But it wasn't only from the inside that they got heat. Externally, as I think we spoke about this morning, there was pressure on them from law enforcement. Law enforcement started to slowly crack down on the ransomware groups. And this is part of like long investigations with private sector involved. So ReEvil, this really shook up everyone. And that's, if you can read the date, it's the 14th of January 2022. That's probably 5 days before the war in Ukraine broke out. But this, even though there weren't even the big affiliates or the admins that were arrested, but the fact that the FSB was arresting these individuals sent a shockwave through the cybercriminal world. On their forums, they're like, oh shit, the FSB is now involved. Oh, we need to look out. So this definitely had an effect. But yeah, this success was short-lived when the war broke out, and they can still do their thing as we do now. But Europol and the FBI was able to arrest a Ukrainian individual behind the Kaseya attack, where Trellix played a little role in as well. So there are arrests taking place, and more. So we see law enforcement gaining more speed and doing more things. And that gives me some reassurance. Also the disruption of Black Cat Alpha Phi. So these are things that are taking place. But we do see a shift. Historically, law enforcement is very much about, okay, let's do arrests, sometimes takedowns, and we kind of see a shift in tactics, what I personally like, and that is obvious by the Hive and the Lockbit disruption, and that is just creating FUD, creating fear and uncertainty among cybercriminals. So infiltrating a ransomware network and just giving the decryptors to the victims, making sure that the income doesn't go to the threat actor, hence breaking the model from the inside. Threat actors don't know who to trust anymore. That model where they had, where you had to be vetted, where you knew like, okay, I'm really working with this person, I can trust them. Now they don't know if the person they're working with is an undercover cop or whatever. And it became even more evident, and that was like a masterful trick with Lockbit, where the NCA infiltrated their network, had control over the leak side, and kind of turned the tables on Lockbit by disclosing the identity, by showing all this stuff. It's trolling, but it does cause them. And we actually, as a community, a lot of companies, Mandiant included, Trellix, we were asked to amplify that news of the infiltration, the disruption. Like, how can we make sure that we send out that message that a lot of these crime groups, they have to look over their shoulders, they can't trust anyone. So this was just a joke that we built, that Lockbit at the time had he had so much bravura, he was so ballsy that he said like, well, if you put a Lockbit tattoo on, we'll pay you X amount of thousands of dollars. So we're saying, well, the tattoos are being removed while the cops are pulling up, just to show that people are fearful. But this was all aimed at creating uncertainty, unsafety within that network. Well, there's one thing, and that's sure, if there's a safe network for cyber criminals, their business will flourish. They will do more business because they don't have their operational securities. There's less risk. And this is definitely something that we've seen a shift in tactics from law enforcement that had an effect. So they're breaking that trust model, which will slow the businesses down. Unstable situation, and that's forces changes. Forces changes amongst the cyber criminals, but there are things that we're like, okay, but this can also be unstable. And one example I want to highlight is about Nochi, another ransomware actor, and he stole some healthcare data. We're not going to disclose the victim here, but essentially in March 2024, at that time, Alpha Phi Black Cat affiliate called Nachi claimed that they got scammed by Alpha Phi. Alpha Phi had an exit scam. They pulled the plug. What happened? They infiltrated a healthcare provider and extorted the healthcare provider with their data. They obtained $22 million from the healthcare provider, or the healthcare provider paid that to Alpha Phi. However, Nachi, who did the hard work, was never paid. So he's complaining on Ramp forum here, like, hey, I never got paid. What was interesting is that somebody else, Coley, who is behind Ransom Hub, said, you know what, save your data, we'll be in touch, we'll figure it out. And yeah, Alpha Phi are a bunch of a-holes. They're like, yeah, they're scammers, don't trust them. Which was interesting. This would just take place a little bit later. And sure enough, yeah, I believe in 10 days later or a couple of days later, the exact same data and even the format of how the data was structured that Nochi posted on Ramp, how he said, okay, this is the data I have, showed up on Ransom Hub. That victim got extorted twice in this case. So that teaches us, like, okay, there's instability among cyber criminals, so they don't know who to collaborate with. They're double-crossing each other. And the one who's, at the short end is the victim, because the victim is being extorted twice. And it shows you that there's probably no such a thing as a real proof of your data being erased. Once stolen, it's out there. So yeah, these are things we have to deal with. And that brings me to a point that the EXXI lockers, the complexity, because make no mistake, encrypting a complete network and doing it so flawlessly that the complete network is the company is at their knees and they have no other ways of paying you is not an easy thing, especially when you think about like the virtualization, the EXI lockers or Linux machines or other types of systems. And we're kind of seeing a shift towards more data exfil. This is our expert summaries from the interview. So I highlighted it's like, yeah, the output that's actually complaining about the Babouk case against the Dutch cheese logistics company. And he discloses later on, like, hey, we're going to focus on data theft because it's much easier for us. We control the affiliate, we control the data exfiltration. We don't have to worry about the encryption. If it is confidentiality, that's the most important thing to the victim, they're absolutely they're suited for data extortion. These are some numbers from Coveware that we have obtained with them. And 2023, we see that the data exfiltration rate, it's rising. It's going to like 93% now. And it's validated. And it's rising. It's getting more and more evident that data exfiltration is now the new norm, whereas it wasn't always the norm. It was the other way around, especially when you look at the early days of ransomware as a service. What's also interesting is that those larger groups that we know, those household names, those organized crime groups, or the motorcycle gang logos, they're making way for independent lone wolves, smaller subgroups, or affiliate groups that we don't really know their name of. It's not really known, so we kind of call them lone wolves, and they're taking a spot. When we look at our posting frequency, so this is a tool we have internally, we scrape all the leak sites, and we look at all the different ransomware versions, and this was from January this year. We have, you don't have to count them, X amount of different ransomware versions, and mind you, it's not that we're not collecting almost everything, we're constantly scraping. This was from August. So you see that there's more scattered smaller groups. And it's easy, right? You have a good pen testing group, you find a victim, you go in, you steal the data, you extort them. And this is interesting. There's no longer, there's a couple of big household names, but the household names gather attention. They will get the heat from law enforcement, whereas the affiliates, they can stay underneath the surface. So what's going on? Is this a single event or is there a larger trend? So this is a model from the UN about like organized crime groups and if it's hierarchical or network-based or enterprise. And I think we're moving a little bit, I don't know if the laser works, from this part towards more here. So more network-based and more enterprise. It's more transactional-based. We see those structures from you can only work for me and nobody else, or in order to get my encryptor, you have to go through this job interview. It's probably no longer the case. It changes. The power balance, in our opinion, has shifted towards affiliates. So yeah, there's uncertainty among cyber criminals. The law enforcement disruptions will take place. And it's harder for law enforcement as well right now because you don't have those big names to go after. It's not that you can do a domino effect from the Lockbit to the whatever and the next one. Now you have to go after the affiliate groups. Because there's instability, there's more likely to be exit scams. The loyalty will change. And there's more smaller platforms. And we see a focus or new platforms being built by new players. So what I mean by that is if we look at the old ransomware as a service, and the ones that actually continued their business into the big game, they were all hardcore cyber criminals, been around since Bogachev. They write their code in C and all like low-level, solid encryptors. Whereas we see now stuff in Rust, we see other platforms coming up, and these are signs that there's new players, new people that step into the arena that weren't the classic cyber criminals. So is this the end of the ransomware as a service if we know it, or is there a new shift where the affiliates or the ones that break in and steal the data is one group, and you just have an extortion broker platform? We're probably in the midst of the change. We have one example that we pulled in recently, translated here, and that's Rabbit Hole. And this is one of these things that we see happening right now, and I'm curious to see what else we're going to see, but they're essentially offering, they're saying like, hey, we're not a ransomware, We're not a group. All we are is a hosting platform for your stolen data. So that's all we offer. We offer you a place where you can steal your data and you have to take care of everything else. And that fits within the realm that everybody essentially goes back or leaves the hierarchy and goes back into that network-based or enterprise transactional-based type of crime, where I offer you this service, you can use my service, no questions asked, you do your thing. So the liability or the loyalty is only in the service. There's no structure or a bigger group. So this will mean that all those affiliates will have a place to host their data, and it will be a mishmash of things. So it's not rabbit hole ransomware, no. Rabbit hole ransomware will host data from numerous affiliate groups. So yeah, we have 4 minutes for questions, but we bring back the statement in the beginning. Ransomware as a service, the strict hierarchy that we've seen that made it so big but also caused the collapse, was it doomed to fail? And maybe I'm biased because the way I'm saying it. Or was it merely a natural evolution or course correction that we've seen? So this is an open discussion. If somebody has their point of view, I'm happy to take it. And other than that, I would like to thank everyone. One in front.
Have there been, can you hear me? There we go. Have there been any comparisons between the ransomware as a service model and what we think of as more traditional organized or familial crime? Because it seems like, to your point, the reason it failed was because they were trying to emulate values that are only possible with actual family, or like an actual, we're all working in a group physically together. So what's your take on that?
Yeah, that's very, very good that you asked that. Some of the examples that we've seen where they fail is where the parts of the family or in the structure were unhappy about the things, how they were run. So either they got scammed, double-crossed, didn't get paid, or they were just unhappy about how the things were going. Those were key factors, so those key success factors. If they broke one of those were, in most of the cases that we studied, that was the downfall, with the exception of Conti with the war breaking out, that there's like, yeah, nobody could predict that. But those were the factors that really changed that hierarchy. And the fact that when we look, and that's no criticism of law enforcement, but it's very easy to focus on the big name, because that's what we said. It's not, you're not going after Lockbit, you're going after the affiliate behind Lockbit. And we've been saying that for years. But by focusing on the name, you kind of leave the affiliates to do all the hard work, who actually do the compromise. You don't put the heat on them. So by doing that, they operate in relative safety, and they can hone their skill and get better and better, and that will influence that power balance. Because then, what's the leverage that the admin within the group has on you? If you're super skilled, you're a highly trained professional, well then it's only like the matter of like, do they pay you the right amount that you're supposed to have for all your hard work, and then it's fine? Do they guarantee some level of OPSEC for you? Do they do other things? Do they make your money laundering easier because they have alliances with Bitcoin tumblers? Those could be considerations to stay with that network. But yeah, if that gets jeopardized, why would you stay there?
Thank you.
So, John, based off of your knowledge of the trend as you've discussed it here, what would you say, according to you, would be ideal for law enforcement and even maybe private sector and security researchers in general to consider as perhaps a probable solution, again, with the knowledge of the expected trend?
Shall I repeat what Alan said this day? So today we heard the drone strikes, but I'm not saying that. So yeah, it's a good one. Like, I think there's been successes with the interagency collaboration. So as soon as like the Treasury Department came in, and not with the sanctions, but also the financial crime units where they trace the Bitcoins because it's about the money, that had made a significant impact. That there is work going on, that it's still ongoing investigations that can have a good impact. for me personally, I think, and this might be a little bit progressive thinking, like, okay, if we're part of Europol, so we're part of their advisory group, Astrelix. And when I look at some of the major investigations that have been successful over the years, they have often jumped off of a tip or information from the private sector. Where if I look at the private sector, there's sometimes, sometimes they overstep their privileges in the gray area. And you can question about ethics, which I think is a good question. But this raises a larger conversation to be had. It's like, are there additional set of skills or things that we can do within law enforcement, if there's a legal framework around it, that we can do things to help law enforcement on the more offensive side within certain safeguards? I would like to have that discussion. So like, how can we shape this? Because you can say no, but inevitably the best successes have been born from these types of things. And if we have that conversation about, okay, how do we shape this in a healthy way or form, I think we have a really good force multiplier.